Welcome, everyone, to episode 368 of Just Joshing. This is story time of the podcast. This is the Cloud Diver release edition, though, so normally I would go first. But I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a little bit in shell shock, actually. My numbers were really good for a debut. My first novel on Amazon, I was rated 4,059 on Kindle, number 8 in Steampunk, number 17 in Cyberpunk. I'm blown away. I'm really, really blown away. I kind of want to thank each and every one of you for believing in me enough to give me this shot. I never, ever expected that good of a start on my first book on my own. So I'm really humbled. I'm really, really, really touched. So guys, thank you very, very much. So while I recover from this, I'm going to give Krista Wallace the shot to go first. Krista is going to be a heck of a tough act to follow, first and foremost. She is an amazing performer. I've had her on the show. She is literally one of the sweetest people I know. Talented writer, amazing performer. She could literally, honestly, have a career being an audiobook. I would actually go so far as to say, Krista, if you decide that you want to go for audiobooks, you should audition. You have an incredible range, and you'll hear it when you read her own book. So I'm going to get into that as soon as we hear from our sponsor. But yeah, I'm kind of in like just kind of a little bit of a mild shock right now. So I'm just going to give myself a minute here to recover. But for now, here's Krista.
This episode of Just Joshing is sponsored by Indie Imprint. Indie Imprint supports creators by creators. Whether you are writing a book or creating a video game, Indie Imprint works with its clients to produce, edit, and present their projects to the world. For more information, check out their website at www.indieimprint.com.
Hey Josh, thanks for having me as your guest today on your podcast. My name is Krista Wallace. I'm a writer, actor, and musician. I write primarily fantasy, though I do dabble in other genres every now and again. My work can be found in places like Pulp Literature magazine, Heart's Kiss magazine, 49th Parallels, an anthology put out by Bundoran Press a couple of years ago. I'm a jazz singer. I sing with a big band called Fat Jazz, and I also have a jazz duo called the Itty Bitty Big Band. And I also do audiobook narration. Pretty soon I'll be launching my own podcast, but I'll tell you more about that later. Today I'm going to read the opening of Gatekeeper's Key, which is book 1 of my fantasy trilogy. Chapter 1. One Way to be Noticed. Another town, another gem of a man who wanted to dazzle her with his broadsword. Damn it, not again. All she had done was sit next to him on one of only 2 empty stools at the bar. Hadn't even looked at him. Kier set her beer mug on the bar with a clunk and eyed the cocky bastard as if he were a squashed slug. What did you say? Full tavern, about 40, 1/3 elven, males and females. He nodded at the empty counter before her. If you're hungry, I got plenty you can feast on. Let's go spend the evening up in my bed. He rested his elbow on the counter, displaying the thickness of his upper arm for her to be roused by. Kier wished she could vomit on cue. She stared at him blankly. Why would I do that? Door to the corridor about 5 paces, exit door about 20 between tables, 2 goblins at the booth behind. He shrugged and blinked slowly in that way that was meant to be alluring but wasn't. No sense you paying for your own room, honey, when Jack and I already took my gear up to my regular room. Wow, she nodded, feigning awe. First name basis with the stable boy. You've taken my breath away. Door to the kitchen to the left. Tricky to leap the bar without taking someone out. I'll do more than that, beautiful, given the chance, he said, oblivious to her sarcasm. I'll pass. She took another large swallow of beer. He repeated his fingers through the dark curls gesture that hadn't impressed her earlier. After 3 weeks on the road and 2 days without food, she didn't have the energy for this. She ignored him with as much threat as she could muster. Honestly, why had Brandau sent her here? Name's Diddick. Simon Diddick, he said, as if she cared. He edged closer with a salacious, sidelong smile. I'm at your service, darling. Funny, you seem to think I'm at yours. A low chuckle burst from a black-cloaked man 2 bar stools down. She'd noticed him right away upon entering the tavern at the Burnished Blade, one of those types who is always watching. Her would-be lover remained unaffected. Oh, come on, you're such a treasure. Only a fool'd let you slip through his fingers. He reached to stroke her cheek, and that was where Kier drew the line. She stood up, bristling, itching with the desire to scratch his eyes out. A serving girl stepped in through the door from the corridor and hesitated next to the fireplace. She gestured to someone, and a large man joined her, leaning his only arm on the doorframe. The silence of the crowded tavern was interrupted by only the crackling of the fire and the jabbering argument of the 2 goblins behind her. Kier's shoulders stiffened with the gaze of human and elf alike, some with curiosity, some poised to flee. Didac was a regular here. Had they seen his tactics before? Nobody seemed eager to offer any assistance. She was on her own, as usual. Fine. Men like you, she said, are boring. Her muscles tingled to life, dispelling weariness and hunger. And you're everywhere, like rats and cockroaches. He laughed. Now that's just plain mean-spirited. Come say sorry. His hand stretched out to touch her again, but halted, because the tip of her stiletto pricked the underside of his chin. Can't. I wouldn't want to lie to you. The threat tactic usually worked against bullies. This one was particularly persistent. Now why don't you go and sit somewhere else, and we'll forget all about this? The cockroach pushed her weapon aside. Because rejection doesn't suit me, especially in front of an audience. The heat of anger climbing her neck, she raised the knife again. Brace yourself for disappointment. His lip curled in a sneer. Apparently he still believed, or was willing to pretend, she was bluffing. You'd better put that away, darlin'. You might hurt yourself. He sought a favorable reaction from the patrons nearby and found none. A calm, cold fury draped over her. She couldn't back down now. Let's settle it. Though the tightness in his lip betrayed a sudden doubt, he laughed. Her eyebrows shot up. So not only are you a boor, you're also a coward, she clarified. His flash of anger told her she might have struck a nerve. I'd have thought it cowardly of me to challenge a girl to a duel. Hardly honorable. He folded his arms on his chest. She couldn't help but chuckle. Isn't it a little late to think about preserving your honor? Kier said. Besides, I challenged you, not the other way around. I must insist we do it properly. He patted the hilt of his broadsword. With an innocent look, as if she were dealing with a child, she sheathed her knife. Naturally. She brushed back her cloak. As she expected, murmurs undulated throughout the tavern. Didac took one glance at her sullied leather armor and the long sheath of the bastard sword at her belt. His face paled, then took on a purplish hue, as if he were angry at her, as if she'd somehow misrepresented herself. Kier sighed with frustration. You can't have thought I'd challenged you to a dagger toss. She gave a quick nod to the publican, who reached under the counter and drew out a book. With respect to our esteemed proprietor, shall we take this outside? Then he won't have to mop your blood up off his floor. Laughter erupted from many of the patrons. The man in the black cloak 2 seats away snorted. That sounds fine with me, Didac said. If you please, the bartender said, holding the book open with one hand and a quill in the other. At the top of the page was written the word duel. Below it was a list of named pairs and dates. Next to one name in each pair was the word victor, and the result, everything ranging from first blood to weapon arm severed. Of the 4 duels listed on the page, none said death, which reflected Kier's opinion that a dispute between civilized people could be decided without loss of life. She took the quill and signed her name under the date, as written by her host. She passed it back to the publican. Kier? He asked, and gestured to the one-armed man in the doorway. No, it's Kier. Most unusual. The one-armed man loomed over her. This is Bill, the publican said. He will be arbiter. He turned the book around again for Simon to sign. And the terms? Kier said, loss of weapon. If I win, you take your sorry ass to the other end and I never see you again. She gave him her back and stalked to the door. And if I win, Simon called. She flung the challenge over her shoulder. "If I lose, I'm yours for the night." "Either way, you're in trouble, boy," a gruff voice said from a table nearby. Kier stepped outside into the crisp, late winter air, shaking tension from her hands. She drew fresh, chilly breaths scented with greenery, filling her lungs, annoyed that it had come to this. When she left home on the advice of her trainer, she was looking for allies, not adversaries. In her 3 weeks of traveling, she'd had to put up with similar propositions more than once, but usually a few firm words were all that was necessary. Here she had sat quietly, kept her cloak wrapped about her, her braid pulled around front, minded her own business. Was she supposed to cut her hair off and wear a floppy hat to be left alone? She embraced the sharp chill in her lungs and focused her concentration. At the edge of the veranda, she surveyed the yard, pond to the left, oak tree out front by the road with a bench surrounding it, driveway from the road to the inn's stable at the right. A delineated fighting space. How many times had the area been used this way? Enough that no grass grew. The sun hung just behind the oak tree, casting mottled shade over the area, but it was by no means dim. She crossed the porch and stepped lightly down to the hard-packed dirt ground. The rest of the patrons spilled out the doors and prepared to watch from the veranda and the driveway as if it were a marketplace cockfight. Bill planted his heavily booted feet at the top of the stairs. "Before witnesses, Kier Halladin and Simon Diddick, to the loss of weapon." The man in black from the bar stood at the end of the veranda, grey eyes piercing from behind shoulder-length black hair. The other patrons gave him his space as they placed wagers with murmurs and shuffling of hands. They became a mere mass of rippling colour in Kier's vision as she dismissed them. She circled the yard, scanning the ground for uneven spots or rocks, a meditative procedure, part of her routine that settled her into inner calm. Damn Simon Diddick couldn't possibly have waited to harass her until after she'd eaten. But never mind. She flexed and stretched her hands and arms and focused on breathing life into all the travel-weary muscles she was about to call on. The clean scent of wood chips and water lilies on the pond seeped in and awakened her senses. The process took no more than a few moments, but when she turned her attention back to her opponent, she wasn't nervous anymore. He approached, watching her uncertainly. She removed her cloak to lay it on the ground. In that brief moment, she sensed a quick movement behind her and heard a stifled gasp from the crowd. She spun around. The coward had already drawn and was coming at her. Outraged, she tossed her cloak at him, entangling him and buying herself time to back out of his reach. In one flowing, swift motion, she let her fingers curl around the hilt of her bastard sword and drew. "Okay, you cheat, you just changed the rules." One-handed, she automatically parried the level slash flying at her left shoulder. The yard echoed with a ring of steel. Her left hand now joining her right on the hilt. She feinted a thrust at his face, and he flinched. And when he over-parried from his right to left, she turned her wrist over in a crossing cut to his sword arm. Again, steel clashed as he stopped it, barely. He countered with a weak thrust, and she easily stepped out of his line, sending his sword down and out of the way. Sensing her advantage, she lunged at him, feet dancing forward, and forced him back across the yard toward the pond. He yielded to her thrust, and with a quick flip of his blade nicked her left shoulder as he passed her. She winced. The sharp pain vibrated down to her hand, but she dared not react further. One to him, but only one. Angry at her carelessness, she regrouped with a deep breath, not taking her eyes off him. His self-congratulatory smile signaled his overconfidence, and she took advantage of his lack of focus to step closer. She charged forward and slashed at his legs, forcing him to stumble to one side in his effort to avoid her blade. A thrill rushed through her. This was what all those arduous hours of training were for. She kept at him, varying her rhythm, tiring him. She parried his every move calmly and precisely, while he became more careless and fell behind her increasing tempo. Kier parried a desperate slash with ease and pivoted to the side. Her blade slid along his with a ringing sound. She disengaged and dropped low, slicing into the muscle over his right knee. With a yell, he clutched his leg and went down, his face twisted with agony from his wound and his humiliating defeat. Instantly, she stood over him. A flick of her foot sent his sword flying a few feet away. Blood dribbled through his clenched fingers to pool into a thick, spreading puddle at her feet. Kier nodded, satisfied. "Loss of weapon. I'll get a healer over here for you. Have a good sleep somewhere else." She turned to retrieve her cloak. A shuffling sound and a gasp from the crowd startled her. She whirled around as Simon, on his feet with his boot dagger in hand, flew at her. His dagger bit the flesh of her upper arm. She plunged her blade into his chest, feeling it grind along his ribs, and as he fell, it stopped in the ground underneath him. Shock in his eyes, his body convulsed and was still. As his blood stirred up the dirt and trickled away in a muddy whirl, so did the red haze lift from around her vision. The magnitude of what she had done hit like a gust of wind, and she staggered. By Garen, I killed him. It was what she had trained to do, and yet she could not have prepared for this. Trembling overtook her from head to toe, and this time it was not from lack of food. Kier let her sword take some of her weight, and gritted her teeth to stop them from chattering. Her rage depleted, exhaustion replaced it. Her knees wobbled, and she knelt down next to her victim's body, gulping air to counteract the nausea. Her breath came out in puffs. I killed him. Quivering like an aspen leaf, she hissed with pain as she drew his knife out of her arm and let it drop. The flow of blood striped her sleeve. Bill shrugged. The outcome was too obvious to declare. Murmurs rose like a flock of birds as the spectators filtered back indoors. Some who'd been watching in the yard stepped over and spat on the cheater's body before returning to what they'd been doing. Kier fought with her conscience. I didn't mean to kill... No, wait. That kind of thinking had to stop. She was a sword fighter, trained for years. He cheated in a publicly recognized duel. He hadn't waited for the opening salute. She'd bested him in fair combat, and he'd come at her back with a knife. If she'd let him live, what would he have tried later? No, mid-battle was not the time to waver. Didac had forced her to make a quick decision, and she'd done it. The difference between this and her last fight, a week before she left home, was not lost on her. This duel had at least been her choice, albeit one she had been forced to make. Better than the surprise attack in an alley by people she knew with 8-1 odds. She shook her head, dismissing the memory and the anger it would rekindle. In the stillness of the yard, she pushed herself up. She braced her feet and yanked her weapon out of its resting place. With trembling hands, she wiped the blood off the blade on his shirt and sheathed it, allowing the steady, automatic movement to restore her equanimity. She unbuttoned his waistcoat and tore a strip of cloth from his sweat-soaked tunic. She fashioned a bandage and tied it, with the help of her teeth, around the arm that had met Simon's dagger. An inspection of her left shoulder showed her only a small amount of blood seeping. That wound could wait. Kier steeled herself, uncomfortable with the thought of performing the customary search, but she had killed him and it had to be done. Bill watched from the top of the stairs. She slipped a tentative hand inside the bloodied waistcoat and found a purse. Her jaw dropped when she found it contained about 30 hexagonal gold nobles, more money than she'd ever seen. Her own depleted purse would be gratefully replenished, and then some. In a breast pocket, she found a piece of cloth folded around a tiny key. She transferred it to her pouch. His dagger was nothing special. Even his sword, though serviceable, was not as good as her own. She left it for the benefit of the clean-up crew. He had nothing else she needed. The job done, she washed the blood off her hands in the pond with a shudder, glad to be rid of the metallic smell. She picked up her cloak, dusty from where Didac had flung it aside. It had a new tear in it thanks to the louse's sword. Great. She stood in the silent yard and stared at the aftermath, the scuffed dirt, the blood, the body, and the responsibility of having begun her life as a sword fighter settled its weight on her shoulders. One last deep breath, long and slow. She'd made a decision. She'd acted on it. It was time to live with it. She took 3 steps back toward the inn and stopped, a flicker of annoyance tingling in her brow. The man in black stood on the veranda watching her, even though everyone else, including Bill, had gone back inside. He leaned against the railing, cloak wrapped around his shoulders, the worn heel of one scuffed riding boot hooked over the lower rung. His long, stringy hair curtained his profile. She continued up the steps and regarded him evenly. If you're the local reeve, I hope that wasn't a personal guest of the magistrate. She walked by him with deliberate, steady steps. Part of her desired to ask the barkeep for the key to Didac's room, now hers, and go to sleep for 3 days. The other part had something to prove. The patrons of the Burnished Blade didn't need to know he was the first man she'd killed. She returned to her seat at the bar, laying her cloak on the counter next to her. A few people overtly whispered. One man raised his mug to her. She felt their scrutiny like darts on her back and sat straighter. Her belly was in knots. Despite the choice of free seats, the man in black sat next to her. Her arm muscles contracted and her hairs stood up. She was not ready for another Simon Diddick. She opened her mouth to make a snarky remark, but the bartender set a fresh pint before her. "I figure you could use that," he said. Kier's dry throat accepted the long, cool drink with gratitude, and her nostrils appreciated the ale's earthy aroma. The liquid calmed the tremor in her hands and began to settle the disquiet in her belly. Her mouth watered suddenly, and she realized she was so hungry a bucketful of dirt might taste good. She finally ordered some food. She raised her mug again, and the man in black raised his glass of wine at the same time. Was he trying to be funny? The bartender winked at her as he went to the kitchen, and she wondered if there were some sort of joke she was missing. Still, in no mood to be friendly to crazy strangers, she drank her beer, watching the man in black out of the corner of her eye as he sipped his wine. She was determined to keep her mug to her lips longer and ignore his game of mirroring her actions, but the annoying man seemed bent on his amusement and kept drinking. She kept drinking too. He drained his wine glass and at last placed it on the wood countertop. Kier set her mug down and also noticed that her knee was bouncing with residual nerves. Sensing a comment from her neighbor approaching, she clenched her teeth and breathed through her nose. She was not inclined to let him draw her into another fight. She turned her torso to close herself off from him and likewise shifted her attention. Maybe the odd man would go away. Why had Brandau directed her here? After the attack in the alley, he had at last said it was time. She'd asked the old man where she should go. "Wanaka," he'd said unequivocally, "to an inn called the Burnished Blade. It's in the southwest corner of Shea Duchy and should take you about 3 weeks. Get yourself a job there in the village." He was right about the time frame, but he never told her why this was the best place to start a new life and search for answers. All he had added was, "It's a hub of sorts. Things happen there." What was special about Wanaka? Apparently not its high class of people. Kier drank again. The bartender burst through the door wearing thick gloves and holding a dish of game pie which he placed before her. He tucked the gloves into his apron and handed her a steaming wet towel to clean her hands. He also refilled her beer glass, which made him her favorite person. "I confess I was hoping you would return without the, gentleman." The delicious aroma of the pie assailed her. Her mouth watered again and she felt weak. But another thought struck her, and it ought to be addressed. Had the gentleman already paid for his regular room? "Yes." The publican wiped his hands on his towel and reached under the counter, pulling out a leather-bound book. "Breakfast is included." Wary of the man next to her repeating Simon's offer, she said, "Perfect." "Splendid." He slid the logbook over to her, not the same book as the dual list, and she filled in her name underneath Diddick's. His name had already been crossed off. He replaced the book under the counter. "I'm McGinn Medlicott, here to take care of your every need. Here's the key. I imagine you'll want to, go through things. I'll have Jack take your belongings from the stable up to the room." Any second now the man in black would offer to join her in her room. At last she picked up her spoon and caved in the flaky crust of pie, drawing out an enormous scoop. A puff of steam issued from beneath the pastry, carrying with it a heavenly aroma of meat and vegetables. She burned her tongue on the first bite and had to hiss cool air through her teeth, but she still ate so fast the pie was 3/4 gone by the time McGinn came back with her neighbor's dinner. She set down her spoon so she could breathe. Her neighbor stabbed a piece of meat with his knife. McGinn smiled. "I guess you like it." She sighed deeply. But something was wrong, unfinished. Brandau's presence was vivid in the back of her mind. Sitting together in his front room after a training session, a bottle and 2 glasses before them. She needed wine, but not just any wine, not for Simon Diddick, her first. Drawing Simon's purse into her hand, she opened it and discreetly counted. It was a veritable fortune, and this was the right choice. It mattered. She got McGinn's attention. Just above a whisper, she said, "Do you have any elvish wine in stock?" His eyebrows went up. "Why, absolutely." He did not move right away, but kept his eyes on her with a thoughtful gaze. Then, with an almost imperceptible nod, as if in approval of some unvoiced suggestion, he disappeared for about 5 minutes, and returned with a dusty bottle and a glass. He opened it for her and said in a low voice, "I can tell that you're a woman of good taste. That's 10 rydals." Kier observed the depth of his fingerprints in the dust that clung to the bottle. She counted 5 nobles out of Simon's purse. She still had plenty to get by on for weeks. McGinn poured a small amount into her glass. It tasted of an ancient melody, plucked delicately on an unfamiliar instrument. It trickled down her throat like a stream from a mountain spring. 10 rydals was a bargain. She'd drunk plenty of elvish wine before, but this was of a whole new quality. Unable to adequately express her appreciation for it, Kier said, "That will do nicely." Maybe that would show the man in black she had some sophistication. But whether it did or not, she needed to carry on. She held the bottle in both hands and closed her eyes. "Is there another bottle like that, Medlicott?" The man in black had a warm voice. "You bet, my lord." The little man trundled off again. Kier frowned. He'd been drinking wine before, so surely he wasn't just copying her again. She focused, mouthing the name of the man whose life she had taken. She poured to fill the glass and set the bottle down. Nonchalantly, in an effort to be inconspicuous, she dipped the 4th finger of her left hand, the weakest finger on her non-dominant hand, into the rich red wine and traced the rim of the glass, not quite completing a full circle. Life cut short. She raised the glass with her right hand just a bit, not so much as to make a big show of it, and spoke Simon's name to herself again. She took a sip, dipped the finger, and once more around the rim in the opposite direction, a full circle this time. Completion. One more raise, followed by a sip. She set the glass down and removed her hands. There. Now things felt right. Like washing dirt from her hands, the tension melted away, leaving her wiped out. Every training session had ended with a glass of wine, always elvish. Brendau had taught her the ritual, and she had run through it countless times. This was the first time she had done it for real, and she finally grasped its import. She picked up her spoon again. The man cleared his throat. Kier refused to acknowledge him. She twisted in her seat, showing more of her back to him, and gazed around the room. Most people had gone back to their meals and beverages. Some sets of eyes darted at her nervously. That she had intimidated a few people was a lovely reminder of home. Others expressed a less familiar emotion, admiration. They looked at her and smiled a little as they spoke to their neighbors. She turned away, unused to approval. The goblins in the corner booth appeared not to have let the excitement interrupt their argument. They were snatching a gold coin back and forth between them. The servers had gone back to carrying trays of ale and food. The chatter was as it had been. It was all very pleasant, but damn it! Why in hell had Brendau sent her here, and why had he sounded overly relaxed about it? McGinn returned with the second ancient dusty bottle and opened it, pouring a taste for the one who'd ordered it. The man picked up the glass with a heavily scarred hand and sipped, licking his lips in unsophisticated satisfaction. Marvelous as always. Kier rolled her eyes. Pretentious git. She lifted her glass and swirled a sip around her tongue. The man in black did the same. Annoyed, she plunked her glass down and spooned up a bite of food. "Well, Kier," said the man, "I'm impressed by your taste in wine." So he thought he had the right to use her first name? She chuckled with a scoffing tone. "Too bad I'm not interested in impressing you." He looked surprised. "I certainly wouldn't want to be your enemy." He indicated the door. Was he mocking her? She did not look at him. "Then I'd advise you not to piss me off." Fair enough. Damn fellow still sounded like he was laughing at her. "Those were some interesting techniques you were using," he said. "If I'm not mistaken, I recognize some of the more subtle moves." Nice try. Kier wasn't about to fall for his bait. He wanted to get her talking to him, but anyone could lie about such a thing. Nobody could truly recognize her Wepnian techniques, but someone who'd trained with Brendau, and he'd been in Hrath longer than Kier could remember, hiding. Anybody who knew Brendau would be someone from his past who did not have his best interests in mind. If this man wanted to avoid being her enemy... Trained by a stocky short fellow, nasty limp from a bad left knee, has an unusual interest in languages. He taught you the wasp maneuver. Kier leapt from her seat, hand on her hilt, the tension in her throat squeezed so her voice was barely above a whisper. Why do you know Brandau? Shit, she should never have said his name aloud, and she wouldn't have if this character hadn't tricked her. Instead of answering, he took on a quizzical expression. Brandau, is it? That's interesting. Why? His grey eyes pierced her, full of laughter. Kier loosened her sword and didn't let go. Who the hell do you think you are, the bloody Duke of Eckert? His face lost all expression. Then the corners of his mouth twitched. His left hand eased back along his belt. His movement opened his cloak just enough for her to see his armour, the breastplate intricately enamelled with the rowan tree of Eckert over the chest and a tiny sprig of foxglove beneath its left side. Shit, she whispered, and the ground fell out from under her. Drowning in embarrassment, she sat down hard on her stool. Mind racing, she connected a profusion of details. The long black hair and moustache, the scars on his hand, and the one down the left side of his face, the cloak made of quality fabric. He was the only other person in the room drinking wine, for the love of Pharaoh, and further, how could she have been so thick to have missed it? McGinn had called him my lord. She'd heard all the stories countless times. She ought to have at least had a suspicion of who he was, even though his hair concealed his ears. If there was a single person in the entire continent of Rydris she would have wanted to impress, this was him. Shit. Her heart plummeted to the bottom of her gut. She drained her glass and tried to think of something to say. He graciously did not smirk as he said, "Pleased to meet you." That's all I have time for today. If you'd like to hear more, please give a listen to my upcoming podcast, Totally Fantastic Title, coming soon to a Wednesday near you. You can also learn more about me at KristaWallace.com. Hey, thanks so much for having me today, Josh. Back to you.
And that was Krista Wallace, killing it, ladies and gentlemen. She does this podcast called Totally Fantastic Title, which you can find at totallyfantastictitle.podbean.com. She's also on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. It airs every Wednesday, so every Wednesday go check out and see what Krista's doing and delivering. Krista is an amazing storyteller and performer. I really loved interviewing her back in the day, and I'm so glad she came on and did this. So Krista, thank you very much. Well, now it's my turn. I don't know if I can live up to this. I made one mistake before I read this, and that was I looked at my numbers before I read it, and my numbers way exceeded my expectations. And I'm still kind of a little bit in shock, so I don't know if I can follow this just right, but I do my best. So we'll just get to my reading, and then we'll wrap the show up. But Krista, thanks again. The Cloud Diver, Level 1-3, Chapter 4. Feed VoidLife. G. Bender, at G. Bender CEO, VoidLife verified. I am always looking for talent at Greater Expectations. Smiley face, send me your resume. At Greater Expectations asked, are you looking for workers? I can do some neat things with quantum engineering. Hashtag need a job. The one thing I didn't expect while tumbling down the stairs was the dust. Minute particles spread through the escape as that part of the building collapsed behind me. It wouldn't be too much longer before gravity would speed up the destruction from the top down. Alarms blared. The building's security voice continued to belt out its customary call, "Intruder alert! Intruder alert!" as we descended. "Hurry!" I heard Gunblade yell, and she somehow went even faster. I swear, she never got tired. She was this ball of motion I forgot somewhere along the way to stop and take a minute to recognize that she's human. I, on the other hand, was aching with pains and bruises. I was in so much pain that my body was beyond the point of yelling at me to stop running. Instead, it was just numb. Debris fell into the sky and plunked behind me. I knew an avalanche of wreckage would fall below us soon. I told my body this was not the time to be numb. It was the time to move or die. I didn't want to have building bits fall on me. I wanted to go home. Instead, I kept going. I had no choice. Floor by floor, I counted down as we drew closer to the main floor. Just when I thought we'd walk out of the main floor, we kept going down the stairs. One gave way to the letter L, which turned into LL, and even a triple L. I groaned. Just how many more stairs were there? I was about to ask Gunblade, who had been walking down with ease when we finally reached the bottom. Gunblade was already through the door, gesturing impatiently for me to hurry. I almost didn't make it. I only just barely jumped through the door before the building groaned and the debris smashed the entrance to pieces. I collapsed on the cold concrete and lay there for a minute, marveling at the miracle of still being alive after all of that. Exhaustion hit me in full force all over my body. It would have been so easy to close my eyes and sleep. Tempting to even begin to describe my feelings of just doing that. I had done enough running and fighting for my life for one night, enough adventure. I deserved a break from my troubles. You okay? I blinked. She was being nice to me? I could sleep for days. I wish I could let you. She walked towards me and reached for my hand. I took hers and flew upwards and upright. I felt like a child in a giant's arms while she gripped me. Who is this person rescuing me? She let me go and I steadied myself and looked away. I know you want this to end, but you can sleep later. We're not out of this yet. She avoided eye contact. Little red dots covered my torso and hers. My shoulders sagged and I nearly dropped to my knees. All this way just to be shot in the end? It wasn't fair. I wanted to cry. We turned towards where the red dots were coming from, and I saw a handful of VoidLife security guards in black uniforms and faceless masks pointing their weapons directly at us. This was it. Either I was going to get shot right here and now, or I was going to be arrested and sent to prison, but I'd probably end up being someone's bitch. All the same, I thought I'd prefer the bullet. As the guards unlocked the safety valves in their guns, I inhaled and braced myself. Water clogging up my eyes as I held back tears. All I wanted was to be happy, but I wasn't. I hadn't been since I took this job to begin with. I had traded away my home, my family, and Lisa for what? To die here in this mysterious concrete slab? This wasn't right. I deserved better. I deserved something more. Gunblade raised her hands and stared at the guards with faces blank as the mask in front of her. She seemed to be waiting for something. Another explosion crescendoed from behind the guards. Her bored expression transformed into a demonic grin. From the explosion, a yellow bird moved more towards the guards, who immediately opened fire. Bullets bounced off the car like they were nothing. One of the guards dropped in ricochet, clutching their shin. The rest of security wasn't so lucky, colliding body first into a solid steel bumper of a yellow car. I watched the guards drop to the ground hard. Cracks formed in the concrete, and I flinched at the blood coming out of the ears of one of them. None of them were likely to ever get up again. The car stopped in front of us, and one of the doors opened to reveal one of the smallest men I've ever seen. He gave me the same commanding look Gunblade had before. Get in! Before I could ask who he was and why I should get in the car, Gunblade grabbed me and shoved me into the back seat, slamming the door behind me. She climbed into the passenger side of the vehicle and motioned for Atlas to start moving. I struggled to get to a more upright position inside this relic of a vehicle as a sudden jolt of horsepower caused me to go back in my seat. The car rolled to life and we headed through the new hole in the wall this yellow vehicle had created. Before long, the artificial tunnel gave way to the wide-open concrete and night sky. It was one of those old roads our ancestors used back in the day. I smelled the foul stench of gasoline burning in the motor and laughed. I looked out the window and saw the scattered remains of a huge metropolis. The skyscrapers that were still standing were only mere shells of themselves. Not that there were many left standing. I was still exhausted, but a new curiosity came over me as the VoidLife vanilling faded to a distant silhouette behind us. You get the package? Asked a gravelly voice from in front of us. Yes, Gunblade answered. Did it all go as planned? For the most part. I looked at the driver in surprised his size. I couldn't help but stare at him. Stevie Y was small because Damon's had to be small. There had to be a clear distinction between us and them, but this man was human, like me, only smaller in stature. For all I knew, he had a giant heart of gold. Who knew the weights the world a man like that carried? Stevie Y, would I see him again? You're awfully quiet, Atlas said. He's been through a lot, Gunblade said to Atlas. Who are you? I asked. Your angel of salvation, he answered wryly. She told us how she met you. Us? And now you have something we want, Gunblade interjected. The file. About that. Peens interjected as bullets bounced out the car. I turned and saw what appeared to be a drunk with an ice cream logo driving towards us. A familiar voice boomed from the sound system. Mr. Wheeler, I am very disappointed in you. Adam was driving as if he'd done this his whole life. There was a hint of the same presentation music that I heard back in my old apartment. Oh, crap, it's Adam. You know him? He's the enforcer of the Ouroboros cartel, Atlas said with a tone of annoyance and respect. Pain in the ass. Very persistent in his tasks. We'll have to lose him on the highway. For the first time since I met Gunblade, I heard a tinge of fear in her voice. The highway? Atlas had his own beat of apprehension. I looked out the window of my vehicle and contemplated jumping out. You got a better idea? Gunblade asked. No, Atlas muttered. The highway it is. Adam's music blared closer to us. I didn't like the idea of him catching us, and neither did they. I see I'm going to have to use the big guns, Adam said. The left side of the truck transformed in front of us, disassembling and reassembling like pieces of a puzzle. A gun formed, big, black, and with an over-the-top, gigantic barrel that seemed capable of turning whole buildings into ash. Alice already started to drive more defensively, bringing us to the gunless side of the vehicle. Adam tried to keep up, but my little vehicle had the advantage of mobility. The real issue was Adam's vehicle was faster. He couldn't slow down and maneuver like us, but he could still keep up with us besides his large bulk. We passed the intersection sign. Sadly, the exit was on our left. We'd have to risk being fired on to make it. "Say your prayers, Diver," Gunblade said before tires screeched and the vehicle collided towards the exit. It was the moment Adam had been waiting for. Boom! Something akin to a meteor shot past us, spinning us clockwise as Atlas struggled to keep the car moving as the meteor kept moving into the far distance. It picked up velocity. A hole appeared where the taillight once was. Before he could fire again, we made it onto the overpass and were heading to the highway. Adam watched us drive by and then stopped the truck. I watched the meteor's trajectory out of pure curiosity. Time seemed to slow as the meteor descended and we moved beyond the external speedway. A loud boom rattled us as the meteor cut through the low like it was a Swiss cheese, leaving a crater in its wake. He could turn back, Atlas said once the fireworks had concluded. "Not likely, Gunblade. It's the highway." "I'm beginning to hate that grin," I said. "We all hate that grin," Atlas replied. "I'd like a little bit of danger." Both of us sighed. "Music?" Gunblade's suggestion. "Seems appropriate." "Music?" I chimed in. A silver ring-like shape disappeared out of nowhere. Gunblade inserted the disc into a slot under digital numbers so 0112, and like magic, the box between the sheets came alive. Harsh, heavy notes blared from the speaker. If we're gonna die, we might as well listen to something appropriate. On cue, a squeaky yet pleasing voice came to the forefront. "No stop sign. Speed limits. Nobody's gonna slow me down." As I listened to the lyrics, I had to agree. Still, why had Adam stopped chasing us?
Think you have what it takes to survive? Then get your ass to Mars! Get Your Ass to Mars is the latest simulation sensation courtesy of Indie Imprint. You are pitted against the hostile nature of Mars. Can you survive and pave the way for future colonists? Or will you succumb to the many pitfalls and obstacles in your way? Get Your Ass to Mars, the Dragon Edition, is available now on PC and Steam. Go to indieimprint.com for more details.
And that was my reading. The conclusion to Chapter 3 is next week, but the book is out. And, well, when we get to my stuff at the end here, I'm going to talk about first about Cassandra Arnold. Cassandra has released her poetry collection, Explode, through Kindle Unlimited. It's free right now, between now and May 18th. So you guys want to check it out, go to CassandraArnold.com, look up Explode on Kindle Unlimited. You can read it for free right now. Congratulations to Cassandra. Cassandra, I wish you the best of luck. It totally is awesome. And yes, Cassandra will be coming on the podcast at a later time. But my weekend's not done. And as crazy as this all has been, and it has been crazy, it's not over yet. I got one more big thing left to do, and it's the other really big important thing right now. And that is Sophia Evangelina. It's my first live podcast of the year. It's going to be a Zoom cast. It will air on Joshua Pantalleresco on YouTube as well as on Zoom. You are invited to participate however you wish. It will be streamed live. It will be fun. And I can't wait. I just can't wait. So that was tomorrow. You're going to see me all suited up, combed hair, trimmed up, getting ready to do this. It's going to be a wildly fun time. I'm going to be working my butt off to get this right. And those that do show up, one of you will be eligible for a book from yours truly. Another of you will be eligible for something really cool from Sophia. What exactly? I'm not sure. She's keeping that a little secret right now. But, yeah, wow. What a way to close the weekend. This is the interview, the kind of interview I want to do for every professional. It's no secret, I think Sophia is amazing. The reason why I think it's amazing, because at 17 she has such a wonderful head on her shoulders. She's incredibly talented. But she's also got a really, really good head on her shoulders. And, I admire that. I admire that big time. And she's going to kill it. Like, no matter what. I mean, our conversation's going to be about her music career, about her new song, Endure. You're going to hear a little bit of that tomorrow as well, as we're going to premiere that. But also, her resilience is incredible. And honestly, I really, really admire it. So I can't wait to do this interview. I truly believe people don't value themselves enough, especially in Canada. And hopefully tomorrow you get a glimpse of just how special she really is. And I can't wait. So that's going to be airing tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. You don't want to miss it. And that will do it for this episode of Just Joshing. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so a number of different ways. You can subscribe to the podcast. I'm on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, most other platforms, and more still coming up all the time. And, It's really, really cool. I got to announce a new one soon. The Cloud Diver, my newest book. It's done really well so far. I want to keep it doing well. Go buy it, subscribe it, leave a review. Actually, the one thing I am going to ask everybody, if you do read it, if you like it, leave a review. If you hate it, leave a review. If you're apathetic, just those are the only reviews I don't want. So if you like it, you hate it, leave a review on Goodreads, leave a review on Amazon. That would greatly be appreciated right now. Beyond all that, guys, stay inspired. And one last thing. Talina Winters, Nicole Popovic, Kat Flannery, Heidi Engel, Ava Holland, which you haven't seen yet, but that's amazing too. Elle Bachman. Thanks, guys. Couldn't have done this without you. And also, finally, I should be remiss if I didn't mention Spilling Ink. Thanks, guys. You guys were awesome. All right. Stay inspired out there. Be grateful, be joyful, and be kind. I'll see you guys next week.
Josh.